What's up, everybody? My name is Joe Brown. This is Heresy Financial, and Bitcoin is out there tearing it up again this week. And trust me, I know there are plenty of objections to Bitcoin out there, but this is something that is vital to understand about investing. There's only one goal only with investing, and that is to maximize your wealth over time. Mark Spitznagel. That is the only goal to investing, and it is the measurement by which you judge success. Maximizing wealth over time. That's it. There is no other goal. Therefore, if you dismiss even the possibility of ever investing in a specific asset, you risk, you don't guarantee, but you risk missing the mark. Many investors have said no matter what happens, there is nothing on earth that can convince me to put a single dollar into Bitcoin. But it is impossible to succeed at the goal of maximizing your wealth over time if there are assets out there that there is nothing that could convince you to invest in them, because that might cause you to miss out on something that would make you more money in the long run. The key is being scientific about it and looking for ways to prove yourself wrong rather than confirmation bias trying to prove yourself right. So with that being said, I would like to look at a few drivers of Bitcoin right now that are looking extremely bullish as it breaks out into this new uptrend. Ready? Let's dive in. One of the nice things about Bitcoin is that it is a public ledger. That means that contrary to what many people think, it is an extremely ineffective form of money for criminal purposes, because every transaction that has taken place with Bitcoin is public and recorded permanently back through the very beginning of Bitcoin. This public ledger also means that we have access to a lot of data that you don't get access to with other traditional assets like stocks or bonds. So looking at this data, there are two trends that I think are extremely important right now that are driving Bitcoin in this recent uptrend that look to continue to drive Bitcoin higher and higher, at least for the short-term future. The first one we are going to look at is long-term holders of Bitcoin. As you can see with this chart from Glassnode, long-term holders of Bitcoin are at an all-time high. The previous all-time high was just about 1 year ago and marked the beginning of a massive uptrend in Bitcoin, as you can see there. Back in April of this year, long-term holders of Bitcoin bottomed out, and again, that marked just about the top of Bitcoin, right around the 60,000 mark. So why does this correlation exist? What is going on here? Well, number one, long-term holders, as the name suggests, are less likely to sell. That means as more of the existing supply of Bitcoin moves into the hands of the long-term holders, the available supply for anybody else who wants to buy and sell is a lot less. That means that with consistent demand, a decreasing supply as Bitcoins move into those hands of those long-term holders will continue to drive that price higher. That's a bullish force. With constant demand and lower supply, pushes price up. Basic supply and demand dynamics going on. Now, the other thing that you'll notice here is that long-term holders are more likely to be buying at the better times, when Bitcoin is moving sideways or when Bitcoin is falling. This means that so far, long-term holders have proven to front-run the trends of the Bitcoin price better than the short-term holders, which again, makes sense. And so this trend would suggest that since we're seeing a new all-time high in long-term holders, that we are about to embark on a massive bull run in the Bitcoin price, just as we have the last couple of times. And then this would be something to watch if the long-term holders start to drop very quickly. That would start to mark the end of that massive run as the Bitcoins shift ownership from the long-term holders to the short-term holders. That's kind of the trend that marks the tops and the bottoms as short-term and long-term holders oscillate between who's holding the majority of the Bitcoin. All right, now let's look at a second chart. This one is called transfer volume in loss. Now, obviously, you can see the data for this comes from Glassnode, but this chart specifically was posted by Game of Trades, who, if you're not already following, is an awesome follow. The transfer volume and loss that you see here, this is the amount of Bitcoin that is being sold at a loss. And as is marked here, the extreme highs in Bitcoin that's being sold at a loss marks bottoms in the price of Bitcoin, which makes sense. These are markers of capitulation, which capitulation happens at reversals. This makes sense because you have investors, you have traders who buy, then now it's at an unrealized loss, and they hold and they hold and they hold as it moves down and down and down until finally they sell. And as a trend, as this happens for the majority of investors or traders, as small trends or big trends, what happens is at the bottoms, those bottoms are put in place by the last people just finally dumping and selling and getting out of it at a loss. At that point, there's nobody left to sell who might be selling. Everybody who's left holding is a long-term holder. There's nobody else that is just waiting for a point to sell. So what you see here is kind of like human psychology going on, where these massive spikes in Bitcoin being sold at a loss are markers of capitulation, which is a reversal point. And so that's why you see the transfer volume and loss peaks right around the same time as major bottoms preceding major rallies. Now, you also see this indicator bottoming, right? Because you see points when the number of people selling Bitcoin at a loss is at big bottoms. And typically when the number of people selling Bitcoin is at bottoms, you don't have as much upside as you do when this indicator has spiked. So when you put all of this information together, it paints a very bullish picture. Number one, there's a supply squeeze going on as long-term holders are pulling supply off of the market and creating a dynamic where as demand stays consistent, there is a lot less Bitcoin available on the market to be bought, driving the price up. Number two, that supply that is moved into the hands of those long-term holders is now much less likely to be sold, meaning that even at higher prices, that supply that is moved into long-term holders' hands has basically come off the market until a later time. Less potential selling pressure. Number three, demand is starting to spike. As short-term holders are out of the game, they're all available to come back in. They've already sold at the bottoms. There's a fresh supply of new buyers, new short-term holders to come in and start that trend where the price starts to spike as short-term holders start to spike. And number four, the available supply or the potential supply to get sold peaks at bottoms when you have short-term holders capitulating, selling at a loss. When you have the total sellers that are selling at a loss spike and peak, usually that's the potential selling peaking there. And from that point, the potential sellers and the total supply decreases, meaning that with constant demand, that price goes up. As is always the case, this comes down to simple supply and demand dynamics. These forces will ebb and flow and oscillate as a pendulum swings back and forth between whether the sellers or the buyers have the most pressure in the market. And as the focus showed today, short-term forces seem to be in favor of the current bull trend continuing strongly. And finally, if you'd like to get started but you don't know where, here are 4 rapid-fire resources for you. If you'd like to slowly accumulate, also known as stacking sats, use Swan Bitcoin. If you'd like to store your Bitcoin in cold storage in a hardware wallet, use Ledger. If you'd like to actively trade and befriend the trends, use Interactive Brokers. Finally, if you'd like to buy with your retirement account to avoid taxable gains on your Bitcoin, use iTrust Capital. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.